After years of oppression and violence, Veronica Winston's life changed the moment her husband, Braden, slapped her after she asked for money to take care of her hair. Humiliation gave way to courage, and what seemed like the end became the beginning of her fight for freedom. Amid threats and dark secrets, Veronica dares to challenge a powerful man willing to do anything to silence her. But how far will she go to protect herself and her children? Find out now everything that happened in this gripping story. Atlanta was a city of intense rhythms, with avenues pulsing to the sound of engines, lights, and the hurried steps of people who always seemed to be heading somewhere. Veronica Winston, however, was stuck, standing still in the same place for years. The house she lived in was a symbol of Braden Winston's success. Located in Brookhaven, one of the city's most coveted suburbs, it exuded opulence. Solid mahogany doors, a garden that always looked like it came straight out of a decor magazine, and tall windows that allowed sunlight to stream in theatrically. But to Veronica, those high walls and the cold marble floors were nothing more than a prison. She woke up early that morning, as she did every day. The habit was almost like armor, a ritual that gave her a sense of control. Before Braden got up, Veronica was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee and preparing his breakfast. The silence of the house was interrupted only by the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. As she sliced some bread, her eyes wandered to a distant point. She thought about how her life had come to this. There was a time when she had dreamed of a different life, when she was full of energy, with an easy laugh and an insatiable curiosity. But Braden had drained all of that from her. They had met 15 years ago when Veronica was still a young literature student. He was charismatic, ambitious, and seductive. His attention had felt magical at the time. He said all the right things, made her feel special, but that initial charm had quickly faded after the wedding. Braden changed. Not all at once, but gradually. He started by criticizing small things, the way she dressed, the friendships she kept, even the books she read. Do you still think you're a teenager? Read something worthwhile, Veronica, something that adds value to our lives. The criticisms were always masked as advice, and she, young and in love, believed he wanted the best for her. Until one day, there was nothing left that he hadn't criticized. His footsteps echoed down the hallway, snapping her out of her thoughts. Braden was an imposing man, always dressed in designer clothes, his hair impeccably styled, and with a gaze that seemed capable of piercing through anyone. He liked to be admired, both at home and in public. "Not done yet?" he asked, his voice sharp as a blade. She swallowed hard, feeling the usual tightness in her chest. "The coffee is in the pot. I just need to... You know I hate waiting, Veronica." He grabbed a cup and poured himself some coffee, moving around the kitchen as if she wasn't even there. He took a sip and frowned. "It's weak. It seems you can't even get that right." She kept her gaze lowered, clutching the dish towel in her hands. When he was in a bad mood, any word she said would only make things worse. "I need some money to go to the salon tomorrow. My hair is a mess, Braden," she finally said, trying to sound casual. He stopped drinking his coffee and stared at her. "Money? What do you think I am? A bank?" "It's just for my hair," she murmured, already regretting she'd asked. Braden let out a short, sarcastic laugh. Then, without warning, the slap came. The force of the blow made her head turn to the side. For a moment, the sound echoed louder than anything else in the house. Veronica raised her hand to her cheek, now stinging, as tears welled up in her eyes. "Don't provoke me, Veronica. Next time, it'll be worse." He left the kitchen, leaving her alone with the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Veronica stood there, unable to move. The impact of the slap was less than what was happening inside her. It wasn't the first time he'd done something like this, but something about that moment felt different. She remembered a night many years earlier, shortly after they had married. She had prepared a special dinner to celebrate a small personal achievement. She had gotten a job as an assistant at a local library. When she shared the news with Braden, hoping he'd be happy, he simply shook his head. "An assistant librarian? Is that what you want for your life?" he said with disdain. "I thought you wanted something worthwhile." It was one of the first times she felt the shadow of his contempt. Since then, the shadow had grown until it consumed everything she was. That night after the slap, Veronica went upstairs to the bedroom and locked the door. Sitting on the edge of the bed, she looked at the mirror. The face staring back at her was that of a stranger. The woman reflected had tired eyes, lifeless hair, and a vacant expression. She touched her red, hot cheek, feeling the sting of the slap mixed with the burn of regret. How had she ended up here? When had she lost control of her own life? For the first time in years, she didn't try to hide her tears. She cried until her body ached, until there was no strength left. But amidst the tears, something began to emerge. A small spark of indignation, of determination. She picked up the phone and stared at it for a long time. There was one person who might be able to help her, but she didn't know if she had the courage to call. Kate, her childhood best friend, was a police officer now. They hadn't spoken in years, not since Braden had started isolating Veronica from her friendships. But Kate had always said she could count on her no matter what. Veronica dialed the number with trembling hands. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello? Kate," Veronica said, her voice barely a whisper. "Veronica, my God, it's been so long. Is everything okay? I need help, Kate. I don't know what to do." Kate's voice grew serious. "What happened?" Veronica took a deep breath, trying to steady her tears. He hit me." There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by a long sigh. "Veronica, listen to me. You need to get out of there. You can't keep living like this." "I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice heavy with fear. "You can. I'll help you. But you have to trust me." Veronica hung up the phone with a promise to speak to Kate again the next day. That night, lying in bed, she stared at the dark ceiling, her heart heavy and her mind full of doubts. For the first time in years, there was a small light at the end of the tunnel. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She would never again be the woman who accepted living in silence. Veronica woke the next morning to the sound of laughter downstairs. It took a few seconds for her to remember where she was and what had happened the night before. The bitter taste of reality returned forcefully. Braden's slap still echoed in her memory, and the sensation of his hand on her face seemed impossible to erase. She got out of bed slowly, her body weighed down by emotional exhaustion and the restlessness of a sleepless night. As she descended the stairs, she found her 2 children, Owen and Sophie, playing in the living room. Owen, at 7, was full of energy and always tried to mimic whatever he saw on TV. Sophie, 5, was quieter, preferring to color in a corner or play alone. The sight of them together should have brought a warm sense of relief, but that day it was a reminder of the weight Veronica carried. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for them. Braden was sitting on the couch, holding his phone while reading something on his tablet. He didn't even look up when she entered the room, simply gesturing with his hand toward the kitchen. "There's fresh coffee. I'm leaving in half an hour. Don't make me wait." It was as though the slap from the night before had never happened. Veronica stared at him, unable to understand how someone could act with such indifference. But she didn't respond. She didn't want to create another situation, especially with the children nearby. She passed through the living room silently, listening to the whispers of her children's voices mingled with the sound of her own thoughts. In the kitchen, while drinking her hurried coffee, the phone in her hand felt heavier than usual. Kate had sent her a message early that morning, saying she was available to talk. But what could Veronica say? How could she explain the years of silence? Why was she only now willing to do something about it? Braden left the house without another word, leaving behind the sound of his footsteps and the oppressive presence that seemed to linger in the air. Once the sound of his car faded in the distance, Veronica finally took a deeper breath. She grabbed her phone and went out to the backyard where she could talk without the walls, seemingly equipped with ears, overhearing. The call to Kate lasted longer than she had anticipated. Reopening old wounds felt like peeling back layers of pain she had buried deep within herself. Kate, with patience and resolve, listened to every detail. Veronica recounted how Braden had changed after the wedding, how the early years were full of small manipulations she hadn't recognized as abusive until it was too late. She described the bursts of anger, the cruel words, and eventually the episodes of physical violence. "Veronica, you need to document this. You need to start building a record," Kate said, her voice firm and steady. "You think he'll let that slide? He's Braden Winston, Kate. He has friends in the police, people in the courts. I'm afraid of what he might do. And I know what he's capable of. I've dealt with men like him before. That's why you need to start now. Don't wait." Veronica ended the call feeling a mix of relief and fear. On one hand, she felt less alone. On the other, the thought of standing up to Braden was terrifying. He wasn't just a powerful man in local politics. He was also calculating, always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Caring for the children, handling household chores and pretending everything was normal was exhausting. When Braden returned home later, he was in a good mood, something that always made her suspicious. He had a way of using these moments to manipulate her, to make her think that maybe he could change. "How are the kids today?" he asked casually, taking off his blazer and tossing it onto the couch. "They were fine. Sophie painted a beautiful picture. She wanted to show you, but you'd already left." "Oh, there's always tomorrow," he said, smiling. For a few seconds, Veronica almost believed that everything could be different, but then he came closer, holding her face with a firm hand. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened yesterday. I don't want you dwelling on it. You know I only lost my temper because I was stressed." Her stomach churned, but she kept her expression neutral. He expected her to agree, to accept the empty apology as she always had. "Of course," she murmured, though every fiber of her being screamed to do the opposite. That night, after putting the children to bed, Veronica took an old notebook she had kept hidden in the back of the closet. Sitting on the bed, she began to write everything down, every incident, every cruel word, every blow. She didn't know exactly why she was doing it, but it felt important to document everything. As if by putting it on paper, she was reclaiming ownership of her story. In the days that followed, Braden seemed suspicious. He asked more questions about how she spent her time and appeared to monitor her more closely. With every message exchanged with Kate, Veronica felt the risk increase. But Kate insisted she had to move forward with her plan to report him. Finally, the day came when Kate convinced Veronica to go to the police station. Veronica left the children with a neighbor, a kind elderly woman who always offered to help. The walk to the car felt interminable, and the drive to the station seemed to stretch endlessly. Every corner, every red light felt like an obstacle, a reason to turn back. When she entered Kate's office, her heart raced. Her friend was there, her expression serious but welcoming. "Are you ready?" Kate asked. "I'm not sure. It's okay to be scared, but just by being here, you've taken the hardest step." The next few hours were a blur of questions, paperwork, and painful memories. Kate was patient but firm, encouraging Veronica to be honest and detailed. When it was all over, Veronica felt drained, as though she had run an emotional marathon. On the way home, her phone rang. It was Braden. She almost didn't answer, but knew he'd grow suspicious if she didn't. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "I picked up a few things at the market. I hope that's true. You know I hate lies, Veronica." She hung up, her hands trembling. Now, more than ever, she knew she was treading on dangerous ground, but she also knew there was no turning back. That Friday began like any other, but Veronica felt an uneasy tension in her chest, as if something was about to happen. Ever since speaking with Kate and filing the report, every moment seemed like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation with Braden. She tried to maintain her routine with the children, but her mind was racing. By late afternoon, when Braden returned home, she noticed he was more serious than usual. He walked into the hall, tossed his keys onto the entryway table, and stopped, watching her for a moment. Veronica was in the living room folding the children's clothes. She felt his gaze piercing through her, but pretended not to notice, focusing on the task at hand. "We need to talk," he said at last. Her heart pounded. She set down the shirt she had been folding and turned to face him. "About what?" Braden stepped forward, hands in the pockets of his tailored suit. His posture was controlled, but his eyes betrayed something else, a restrained fury on the brink of eruption. "You went to the police." The world seemed to stop. Veronica felt the blood drain from her face, and her hands began to tremble. He knew. Somehow, he knew. Don't lie to me, Veronica. I have my connections. I know exactly what you did." He took another step toward her, and she instinctively stepped back. Braden laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you can take me down? Me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I just want to protect my children and leave this house," she replied, her voice shaky but resolute. Braden cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Your children. You think you'll keep them? I'm a respected man, Veronica. Judges, lawyers, politicians, they're all in my pocket. You're an unstable, emotionally fragile housewife. Do you want to know what will happen if you keep pursuing this idiotic idea of divorce? I'll make sure you lose everything. The kids, the house, your reputation, everything." Veronica felt the air leave her lungs. His words were a direct hit to her deepest fears, but at the same time something within her began to rebel against the suffocating oppression. She knew Braden was dangerous, but she also knew she couldn't retreat anymore. "You may have power," she said, her voice steadier than she expected, "but I have the truth." Braden laughed again, but this time there was something more in his expression, a mixture of disdain and perhaps fear. That night, after the children were in bed, Braden left the house without saying where he was going. Veronica seized the moment to put a plan into action. She needed more evidence, something concrete to bolster her case and protect her in court. She went to his office, a meticulously organized space he rarely allowed her to enter. The bookshelves were lined with volumes on politics, business, and law, all perfectly aligned. On the desk, there was a stack of documents and his laptop, which she knew was always password protected. Veronica took a deep breath. She knew she had little time before he returned. Sitting in the leather chair, she opened one of the desk drawers. Inside, she found folders containing financial documents, contracts, and bank records. Most of it seemed routine, but one folder caught her attention. It was labeled with the name of a company she had never heard of before. Opening the folder, her heart began to race. The documents revealed suspicious transactions, payments to politicians, and contracts with oddly vague clauses. The more she read, the more she realized she had stumbled upon something big. The evidence pointed to a corruption scheme led by Braden, involving influence peddling and bribery. She grabbed her phone and took photos of everything. She knew it was risky, but also knew it might be her best chance at protection. When she finished, she carefully put everything back in its place and left the office, her heart pounding. Braden returned late that night, reeking of whiskey and with a satisfied look on his face. He didn't say a word to her, simply heading upstairs and closing the bedroom door. Veronica spent the entire night awake, thinking about what to do with the information she had found. The next morning, Kate called her. "Veronica, we need to talk. The chief told me Braden is already pulling strings. He's filed a complaint against you, claiming you're a negligent and emotionally unstable mother." Veronica felt the ground fall out from under her. It was exactly what Braden had threatened to do. "He's going to try to turn this against me, isn't he?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, but you're not alone. We still have a chance, especially if you have something solid to use against him." Veronica hesitated for a moment, but then decided to trust Kate. "I found some things in his office, documents showing he's involved in something big." Kate was silent for a few seconds, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with urgency. "Veronica, you need to bring that to me, now." They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe in downtown Atlanta. Veronica arrived with trembling hands, clutching her phone with the photos she had taken. Kate quickly reviewed the images, shaking her head in disbelief. "This is huge. He's involved in corruption at a level that could take down several people." "Do you think it's enough to protect me?" Veronica asked, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "More than enough. This could destroy him." But Kate also warned her of the risks. Braden wasn't the kind of man to accept being challenged. He would do everything in his power to silence her. When Veronica returned home that night, she found Braden sitting in the living room, waiting for her. He looked at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can destroy me, Veronica? You think I don't know what you're doing?" She tried to remain calm, but the tension in the room was almost unbearable. "I just want my freedom, Braden." "Freedom?" He laughed, shaking his head. "You'll never be free of me." At that moment, Veronica knew she was at war. When Braden went upstairs that night, Veronica remained seated on the living room couch, paralyzed. Every word he had spoken still echoed in her head like a deafening alarm. "You'll never be free of me." It wasn't just a threat. It was a declaration of absolute power, the warning of a man who believed he controlled everything and everyone around him. Her body trembled, and her heart pounded as if it were trying to escape her chest. She tried to focus on something to calm herself, the glow of the lamp beside the couch, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the distant hum of cars on the street, but nothing worked. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of what he would do if he discovered she had the evidence. Upstairs, she heard the creak of Braden's bedroom door closing. He hadn't taken any direct action against her that night, but his mere presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that she was treading on thin ice. Veronica knew that by stepping into this war, retreat was no longer an option. Yet the courage he had felt after handing over the photos to Kate seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a visceral fear. She spent the entire night awake, lying in bed next to Sophie, who had sought comfort from her mother after a nightmare. Every soft breath from the little girl only reinforced the weight of Veronica's responsibility. She couldn't fail. She couldn't let Braden hurt them or take them away from her. The next morning, Veronica was exhausted. She prepared breakfast for the children mechanically, smiling at Owen and Sophie as if everything were fine, even though she was falling apart inside. Braden came downstairs later, as always, impeccably dressed and wearing a smile that felt crueler than any insult. "Good morning, family," he said cheerfully, his tone dripping with false warmth. Veronica ignored him, focusing on pouring juice for Sophie, but he wasn't the type of man to tolerate being ignored. He approached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Everything all right, dear? You look tired." She froze at his touch but managed to mumble, "Just a bad night." Braden gave her shoulder a slight squeeze before stepping away, grabbing an apple from the counter. "Take care of yourself, Veronica. We wouldn't want you to become unstable." He left shortly after, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with tension. The moment the door closed, Veronica let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Owen looked up at her, puzzled. "Mum, are you sad?" She crouched down to his level, running her hand through his blonde hair. "No, sweetheart. Everything's fine." But it wasn't. When the children left for school, Veronica found herself alone in a house that felt larger and colder than ever. Sitting in the living room, she clutched her phone tightly, wanting to call Kate but terrified that any further action might alert Braden. The weight of the situation felt crushing, and for the first time in a long while, she began to doubt if she had the strength to continue. Veronica was no stranger to these moments of doubt. For years, Braden's control had made her believe she was weak, that she couldn't achieve anything without him. He had isolated her from friends, driven away her family, and convinced her that the world outside was more dangerous than the life he provided. For a long time she had believed him, but now things were different. Despite the fear, a part of her knew she had crossed a line. There was no going back to the silence she had endured for so many years. Braden could intimidate her, threaten her, but she was no longer the same woman who accepted living in submission. Even so, the weight of facing such a powerful man felt insurmountable. Veronica spent hours considering the possible consequences. What if Braden really did take her children from her? What if he used his connections to ruin her reputation and make the world believe she was the villain? In the afternoon, Kate called, breaking through her spiraling thoughts. "Veronica, how are you holding up?" "Scared," she admitted. "That's normal. You're facing a monster, but you're not alone. Listen, I spoke with the prosecutor. He wants to see the evidence you found. This could change everything." "Kate, what if he finds out? He already knows I went to the police. I feel like he's watching me." "That's exactly why we need to move quickly. The longer you hold on to that evidence, the more at risk you are. Do you trust me?" Veronica hesitated for a moment. She did trust Kate, but the decision felt like stepping into the unknown. "Yes," she finally replied. "Good. I'll arrange a meeting with the prosecutor. But until then, stay alert, okay? If anything feels off, let me know immediately." After hanging up, Veronica tried to focus on her daily tasks. She washed dishes, tidied up the bedrooms, and organized some of the children's clothes. Each small activity was an attempt to distract herself, but nothing could silence the growing anxiety. Later that day, when the children were watching television in the living room, Veronica sat on the porch with a cup of tea. She watched the trees sway in the wind, the sky painted in shades of orange by the setting sun. For a few moments, she managed to find a sliver of peace. But it didn't last. Braden came home earlier than usual, bringing with him an unsettling energy. He walked into the house, glancing around as if searching for something. "Where are the kids?" he asked. "In the living room." He made a noise of approval and went to the kitchen, where he poured himself a glass of whiskey. When he returned, he sat in the armchair across from her, crossing his legs and swirling the glass in his hand. "We have a problem, Veronica." Her heart began to race. "What kind of problem?" "I've been hearing things about you. It seems someone's been talking about me." She tried to stay calm, but her voice betrayed a faint tremor. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I think you do, and I'm giving you a warning because I'm a generous man. Stop now, or things will get very ugly for you." Veronica met his gaze, feeling anger rise in her chest. For years, he had intimidated her, manipulated her, made her feel insignificant. But at that moment, something shifted. "You can threaten me all you want, Braden, but I'm not staying silent anymore." His expression darkened, and for a moment, she thought he might strike her then and there. But instead he stood, adjusted his jacket, and gave her a cold smile. "Let's see how long you can hold out, Veronica." When he left the room, she collapsed onto the couch, drained. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but there was no turning back now. That night, after Braden left, Veronica locked the front door and allowed herself a moment to breathe. With the children already asleep, she sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out the notebook where she had been documenting the abuse. She ran her fingers over the pages, filled with words written in anger, fear, and, at times, quiet determination. Each line was a painful memory, but also evidence. It was the foundation of a resistance she never imagined she had the strength to build. The next morning she called Kate early. This time there was no hesitation in her voice. "I'm ready to meet with the prosecutor," she said. Knowing these words marked a turning point in the battle she was fighting, Kate didn't waste time. She scheduled a meeting for that same afternoon. Veronica spent the hours leading up to the appointment trying to focus on her children, but the anxiety was almost suffocating. Worries plagued her. What if the evidence wasn't enough? What if Braden found out before she could take any concrete action? When she finally parked in front of the building where the meeting was to take place, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Kate met her in the lobby and escorted her to a discreet room on the second floor. Inside, the prosecutor, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, was waiting with an open folder in front of him. Veronica presented the photos she had taken of the documents in Braden's office. The prosecutor reviewed everything carefully, jotting down notes and occasionally murmuring to himself. When he finished, he looked at her with a mix of seriousness and approval. "This is substantial. These documents are enough to launch a preliminary investigation, but you need to be prepared for what this means." "What do you mean?" Veronica asked, her voice steadier than she felt inside. "As soon as we start digging into this, he'll know. Men like Braden don't take being challenged lightly, especially by someone they perceive as vulnerable. You need to be ready for retaliation." Kate placed a reassuring hand on Veronica's shoulder. "She won't face it alone. We won't let him intimidate her." Veronica nodded, but inside she felt a cold dread. She knew the road ahead would be grueling, but she also knew she had no choice. It was either fight or continue living under Braden's shadow, something she could no longer accept. When she returned home, she found Braden in the living room, as though he had been waiting for her. He was seated in his favorite armchair, a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression inquisitive. "Where were you?" he asked bluntly. "I had some errands to run downtown," she replied, trying to sound casual. "What kind of errands?" Her heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "Shopping for the kids." Braden was silent for a few moments, as if assessing her response. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you think you can fool me, Veronica? Do you think I don't know what you're up to?" She didn't respond, but met his gaze directly. For the first time, she didn't look away. "I hope you're ready for the consequences," he said before standing and leaving the room. As he climbed the stairs, Veronica sank into the couch, trying to process what had just happened. Braden knew something was going on, but seemed uncertain about what exactly. That gave her a small advantage, but it also heightened the danger. In the following days, Veronica worked quietly to solidify her plan. With Kate's help, she organized the evidence into a more detailed dossier, including dates and contexts that strengthened her case. She also began recording conversations with Braden whenever possible, using a hidden recorder Kate had provided. Every word he said became another piece of the puzzle she was building against him. At the same time, Veronica knew she needed to protect her children. One night, after Owen and Sophie were asleep, she called her sister Emily, who lived in Savannah. It had been years since they'd had a long conversation, but Emily had always said she'd be there for her. "Emily, I need a huge favor," Veronica began, trying to keep her voice steady. "Of course, what is it? Can you take care of the kids for a few days? Just until I can sort some things out here." Emily was silent for a few seconds, but then responded firmly. "Of course I can. When do you want to bring them?" By the end of that week, Veronica took Owen and Sophie to Savannah, telling them it was just a small trip to visit their aunt. The children were excited about the idea, but Veronica knew she was sending them away to keep them safe. As she said goodbye, she held back tears until she was alone in the car. With the children secure, Veronica returned to Atlanta with renewed focus. Without the constant worry of exposing them to danger, she felt freer to act. She spent more time working with Kate, reviewing the evidence and strengthening the case. Every new piece she added to the dossier felt like a small victory, a reminder that even though she was up against a giant, she was not powerless. But Braden didn't remain idle. The day after the children went to Savannah, he confronted Veronica. "Where are Owen and Sophie?" he asked, his voice filled with suspicion. "They went to visit Emily." He stepped closer to her, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Without telling me. You never care about what I do. Why should this time be any different?" Braden grabbed her arm, gripping it tightly enough to make her uncomfortable, but not enough to leave a visible mark. "Don't think you can cut me out of decisions about my children. You've never made decisions about them before," she retorted coldly. He let go of her abruptly and stormed out of the house without another word. That night, Veronica felt both vulnerable and powerful. She knew she had provoked Braden, but she also knew he was starting to lose control. The days that followed were a tense dance between them. Braden continued trying to intimidate her, but Veronica didn't back down. Every small victory, every moment she managed to stand up to him was a step closer to freedom, and though the fear still lingered, it was overshadowed by her growing determination. Now with the evidence in the prosecutor's hands, the children safe and Kate by her side, Veronica was ready for the next phase. She knew there was still much to face, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had a real chance to win. Veronica knew the days ahead would be critical. Braden, even without concrete proof, was more suspicious and unpredictable than ever. Every move she made seemed scrutinized, every word analyzed. The tension at home had become almost unbearable. He no longer bothered to hide that he was in a constant state of alert, like a predator sensing danger. The morning after their confrontation about the children, Veronica woke earlier than usual, bracing herself for another exhausting day. Braden was already in the dining room, flipping through the newspaper while sipping coffee. When she walked in, he glanced up, and the silence in the room felt heavier than ever. "You've been going out a lot lately," he said casually. "I have things to take care of." "Interesting," he replied, folding the newspaper neatly before fixing his gaze on her. "I hope you're not doing anything that might harm me." Veronica kept her expression neutral, though a chill ran through her. "I'm just looking after the kids and the house, Braden. I don't know where you get these ideas." He gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good, because I warned you, Veronica. If you try to harm me, you'll regret it." He stood, adjusted his jacket and left without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house, and Veronica finally let the tension leave her body, but not for long. By late afternoon, Kate called, her urgency putting Veronica on high alert. "Veronica, we need to talk. The investigation is moving faster than we anticipated, but that means Braden is making moves too. He's already reached out to some of his political contacts to try to shut things down. And what does that mean for me? It means he's feeling cornered, and that makes him even more dangerous. You need to be careful." Veronica thanked her for the warning, but when she hung up, unease settled over her like a heavy cloud. Braden was a methodical man, and the fact that he was acting so desperately meant he truly felt threatened. That evening, while preparing dinner, she received another call, this time from an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered, and a male voice she didn't recognize came through the line. "Veronica Winston? Who is this?" "My name doesn't matter. I'm calling to warn you. Stop now, or the consequences will be irreparable." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Veronica stared at the phone in her hand, her fingers trembling, her heart pounding. She rushed to the door, double-checking that it was locked, then went to the windows and closed all the curtains. She knew Braden had powerful allies, and that he was willing to use every resource at his disposal to silence her. When Kate arrived later that night, she found Veronica in a state of panic. "I got a call. They're threatening me, Kate." Kate, ever pragmatic, took her hands firmly. "Listen, this is what they do to try to scare you. But you're safe. You have me, and now you have the legal system on your side. Do you really think the system can protect someone like me against him? I think you underestimate your strength. You've already gotten further than he ever imagined you could." Kate's words offered some comfort, but the fear didn't vanish entirely. That night, Veronica struggled to sleep. Her mind played out every worst-case scenario. Someone breaking into her home, Braden twisting the system to ruin her, or worse, her children being used against her. The next morning, while having coffee, she noticed a black car parked across the street. She didn't recognize the model, and the driver showed no intention of leaving. The car sat there for hours, engine off, as if waiting for something. Veronica tried to ignore it, but its presence was a constant reminder that Braden had eyes everywhere. She called Kate again, and this time her friend suggested something Veronica had never considered. You need a safe place to stay, at least for now. Somewhere Braden can't reach you until we have more concrete measures to keep him away. What about the kids? Emily can continue caring for them, but you need to think about yourself too. The idea of fleeing, even temporarily, was tempting, but Veronica knew she couldn't disappear entirely. It would only reinforce the narrative that she was unstable, something Braden could use against her in court. I can't, Kate. That'll just give him more ammunition. Kate sighed on the other end of the line. Then we need to ramp up your security. I'll arrange for someone to keep an eye on your house. The next few hours were spent preparing for what lay ahead. Veronica reviewed the dossier with Kate once again, adding details about the threats and the suspicious car. Every new detail became another weapon in her arsenal, a way to tip the scales against Braden. But deep down, she knew things were about to get worse. 2 days later, while driving home from a meeting with Kate, Veronica realized she was being followed. The same black car she'd seen parked near her house was now trailing her, keeping a steady distance. She tried to stay calm, but panic began to set in. She changed lanes, took side streets, but the car remained. Deciding not to go home, fearing what might happen, she drove straight to the police station, where Kate met her. He's tightening the noose, Veronica said, still trying to catch her breath. He's trying to intimidate you, but that means he knows he's losing, Kate reassured her. Kate called 2 officers to check on Veronica's house, but the black car had disappeared before they arrived. Veronica's frustration was evident. She knew Braden was too clever to leave direct evidence of his intimidation. When she returned home, she found an envelope taped to the door. The plain, unmarked paper made her heart race. With trembling hands, she opened it, and the contents made her stomach drop. Inside were photos of Owen and Sophie, taken without her knowledge. The images were recent, showing them playing in Emily's backyard. On the back of one of the photos, a message was scrawled in small, precise handwriting. You know what to do to keep them safe. Veronica's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, clutching the photos as if they were explosive. When Kate arrived and saw the photos, her expression hardened. This is a dirty tactic, but it's also a mistake. Now we have more evidence against him. Veronica shook her head, tears streaming down her face. What if he hurts my children, Kate? I can't take that risk. Kate knelt beside her, gripping her hands firmly. He won't hurt them. He's trying to break you, Veronica, but you're stronger than he is. Veronica closed her eyes, trying to absorb Kate's words. The fear was still there, but something within her began to solidify. Braden could intimidate her, but she knew the only way to protect her children was to keep going with the plan, no matter the cost. The envelope with the photos never left Veronica's mind. The image of her children, taken secretly, was more disturbing than any direct threat Braden had made. For the first time, she was certain he was willing to go beyond intimidation. He was playing on her vulnerability as a mother, exploiting every fear she carried. In the days that followed, Veronica stayed in constant contact with Kate, reporting every suspicious move and submitting the photos as part of the growing dossier against Braden. Despite this, panic was a constant presence. She barely slept, and when she did, nightmares of Braden taking her children, or worse, haunted her. The breaking point began to take shape on a hot, stifling afternoon. Veronica was at home, reviewing Braden's financial records for what felt like the 1,000th time, searching for something that could be the decisive piece of evidence against him. The silence in the house was unsettling, amplified by the absence of the children, who were still with Emily. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was Kate, but her voice lacked the steadiness Veronica had come to expect. We need to meet, Veronica, now. What happened? Just come to the station. Veronica felt her blood run cold. Without asking further questions, she grabbed her bag and drove quickly through the streets of Atlanta, her mind racing with possibilities. When she arrived, Kate was waiting in the lobby, her face grave and her expression deeply worried. "What's going on?" Veronica asked, nearly breathless. Kate hesitated before answering. "We've received a complaint against you. Anonymous, but detailed enough to open an investigation. They're alleging that you're mentally unstable and neglectful toward your children." Veronica froze, feeling the ground vanish beneath her feet. "This can't be serious. You know this is Braden's doing." "I know, and we're working to expose that. But the complaint has been filed and there's a possibility that Child Services will investigate." Kate's words thundered in Veronica's head. It was exactly what Braden had threatened, and now he was following through. "What do I do now?" Veronica asked, her voice trembling. "You keep fighting. Don't let this intimidate you. Remember, we have enough evidence against him to turn this around. We'll use it to your advantage." But the fear wouldn't let go. The thought of someone questioning her ability to care for her children was devastating. She spent the rest of the day grappling with what this meant, while Kate made frantic calls to expedite the case against Braden. When Veronica returned home that evening, she found the back door ajar. Her body went on high alert. She grabbed her phone and called Kate, who promised to send a patrol car immediately. As she waited, she walked through the house, her muscles taut like a bowstring ready to snap. In Braden's office, she found something that made her freeze. His laptop was open, and on the screen was an email he had evidently forgotten to close before leaving. The recipient was a name she vaguely recognized, one of Braden's political allies, but it was the content that made her stomach churn. "We need to silence her before she goes any further. I can't let this get out of control. I'm arranging a definitive solution." The word silence knocked the air from Veronica's lungs. She had always known Braden was ruthless, but seeing it laid out so explicitly was something else entirely. He was planning something irreversible. As she read, she heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. She ran to the living room and saw the flashing lights of a police car illuminating the driveway. 2 officers entered, followed by Kate, who looked more concerned than ever. "Are you okay, Veronica?" "No, he's planning something. He left his laptop open. And there's an email. He's talking about silencing me." Kate's brow furrowed as she went to the office to check. When she returned, she was holding the laptop carefully. "This is serious. I'm taking this to the station immediately." Even with Kate taking charge, Veronica couldn't shake the feeling of danger pressing in on her. The threat felt omnipresent, and she knew Braden wouldn't give up easily. The next morning, Veronica woke to a message from Emily. "A man came by asking for you. Said he was a friend, but I didn't believe him. We're fine, but I thought you should know." Veronica's stomach churned. She called Emily immediately. "What did he look like? What did he say?" "Tall, dark hair, wearing a suit. He said he urgently needed to speak with you, but didn't give his name. I didn't let him near the kids." "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone in, Emily. I'll handle this." When she hung up, despair threatened to overwhelm her. Braden was tightening his grip, using every tool at his disposal to intimidate her, but it also meant he was running out of options. Later, Kate called again, this time with news that brought a mixture of relief and trepidation. "We've secured a warrant to search Braden's office. We have enough grounds to believe he's hiding more evidence there." "That's good, right?" "Yes, but it also means he'll know the walls are closing in." "Be prepared, Veronica. He's going to react." Kate's words lingered in Veronica's mind for the rest of the day. She knew she was approaching a decisive moment, but the emotional and physical toll was already immense. As she looked at the notebook where she had documented her experiences, she realized it was no longer just a record of pain. It was tangible proof of her fight. That night, before going to bed, she did something she hadn't done in years. She knelt beside her bed and prayed. It wasn't a long or eloquent prayer, but it was honest. She prayed for strength, for her children's safety, and most of all for the courage to face what lay ahead. Veronica knew she was at her limit, but she also knew she couldn't turn back now. The next morning, the search operation at Braden's office began early. Kate informed Veronica that the officers had found more than they expected. Detailed records of illegal transactions, fraudulent contracts, and even messages exchanged with accomplices explicitly referencing the influence peddling scheme. Kate assured her that with this new evidence, Braden would now face a federal investigation. But Veronica knew this would only fuel his rage. When Kate called again in the afternoon, the gravity in her voice confirmed Veronica's worst fears. "He's disappeared, Veronica. He didn't show up for work and isn't answering anyone." "What does that mean?" It means he's cornered, and men like Braden don't back down without a fight. Panic surged within her, but it was tempered by a new resolve. No matter what happened, she would no longer be a victim. She grabbed her phone and sent a message to Emily. "Keep the kids inside. Don't trust anyone who shows up." She then reinforced the locks on the doors and checked the recorder Kate had installed in the living room. Every action felt like preparation for an inevitable confrontation, and the tension was nearly unbearable. As night fell, Veronica sat in the living room trying to read a book but unable to focus. The silence in the house felt oppressive until it was broken by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Her heart raced as she peeked through the window. She recognized the vehicle immediately. It was Braden. He stepped out wearing a dark suit as if heading to an important meeting, but his expression was one of unbridled fury. Veronica knew he was here to confront her, and that she couldn't let fear paralyze her. She opened the door before he could knock, facing him on the doorstep. "What do you want, Braden?" "What do I want?" He laughed, but the sound was cold and unhinged. "I want to know why you think you can destroy everything I built. Everything you built was based on lies and abuse." He stepped closer, but Veronica resisted the urge to back away. "You think anyone will believe you? You think those so-called proofs will bring me down? I still have friends, Veronica. Friends who know how to handle problematic women. You can't intimidate me anymore, Braden. It's over." Braden narrowed his eyes, studying her. "You know what I think? I think you never knew your place. You always wanted more than you deserved, and now you're trying to drag me down because you couldn't control me. You're projecting, Braden. You were the one who always needed control, who could never accept that I could be more than your shadow." He stepped even closer, and she caught the smell of alcohol on his breath. "You think you're strong now? Because you filed a report? Because you handed over a few documents? That won't save you." Veronica knew the hidden recorder was capturing every word. She had to stay calm and push him to say more. "I'm done staying silent, Braden, and I won't let you hurt anyone else." He laughed again, but this time there was a manic edge to it. "You really think you're that important? You're nothing but an insignificant detail." Before he could say more, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Braden turned, visibly startled, then looked back at Veronica, who stood her ground. "Have you called the police?" "I didn't have to call, Braden. They were already looking for you." Two police cars pulled into the driveway, and officers quickly stepped out, weapons drawn. Kate was among them, and her presence brought Veronica a mix of relief and courage. "Braden Winston, you're under arrest," Kate announced firmly. "For what?" Braden shouted, raising his hands as the officers surrounded him. "This is absurd. I'm a respected man." "You're being charged with corruption, fraud, and domestic violence," Kate said, looking him directly in the eyes. Veronica stood motionless as the officers handcuffed Braden and led him to the car. He struggled against the restraint but had no choice but to comply. Before being placed in the vehicle, he turned and gave Veronica one last glare. "This isn't over." She watched as the police car drove away, taking Braden with it. When the house was silent again, a wave of emotion hit her. It wasn't complete relief, but it was close. She knew this was just the beginning of a long legal battle, but it marked the end of an oppressive chapter. Kate approached, placing a hand on Veronica's shoulder. "You were incredible, Veronica. I just did what I had to do, and that was more than enough." That night, Veronica sat alone in the living room, holding the notebook that had been her refuge for so long. Each page was a reminder of what she had endured, but also a testament to her strength. She picked up a pen and wrote on the last page, "Never again." She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew that for the first time in years, she was free to rebuild her life, far from Braden's shadow. The days following Braden's arrest were a chaotic mix of relief, uncertainty, and emotional exhaustion for Veronica. Though he was in custody, the shadow of his power and influence loomed over her like a thick cloud. The local media, ever hungry for scandal, quickly latched onto the story, and Veronica's name dominated headlines and TV reports. Veronica Winston breaks her silence. Domestic violence and corruption allegations rock promising politician. While many expressed support, others were quick to judge. Social media comments and the whispers she overheard on the street revealed that some questioned her motives, painting her as opportunistic or unstable. Braden's allies were determined to discredit her. In the first few days after the arrest, Veronica decided she couldn't return to the house she had shared with Braden. It was filled with suffocating memories, every room echoing with his humiliations. With Kate's help, she found a small temporary apartment in a quieter part of Atlanta. It wasn't luxurious, but it offered something the mansion in Brookhaven never had: peace. The children returned home soon after. Veronica greeted them with tight hugs, tears streaming down her face when Owen asked, "Mum, are we going to be okay now?" She stroked his hair and answered with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be okay." The first days in the new apartment were challenging. The children had questions she wasn't ready to answer. Owen wanted to know why their father was on TV and why so many people were saying bad things about him. Sophie, quieter, seemed to feel Braden's absence more deeply, occasionally asking if he would visit them. "Does he love us?" Sophie asked one night as Veronica tucked her into bed. Veronica hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but also didn't want to shatter her daughter's innocence. "He loves you, Sophie, but sometimes adults make very big mistakes." Sophie seemed satisfied with the answer, but Veronica stayed up for hours afterward, reflecting on how their future would unfold. On the legal front, the case against Braden gained momentum. The evidence was overwhelming, and additional documents found in his office bolstered the corruption charges. Veronica's courage inspired others to come forward. 2 former employees of Braden contacted Kate, recounting incidents of verbal abuse and, in one case, physical assault. With each new witness, the weight of Veronica's story lessened slightly. She wasn't alone anymore. Her voice had become a catalyst for something larger. But the fight wasn't without challenges. During the first month after the arrest, Braden's legal team worked tirelessly to defend him. They attempted to twist the narrative, portraying Veronica as emotionally unstable and vengeful. At a preliminary hearing, one of Braden's attorneys even insinuated that she had fabricated evidence to incriminate him. Veronica sat in the courtroom, her fists clenched under the table, listening to the accusations. When it was her turn to testify, she took a deep breath and faced the judge directly. "For years I lived in fear, not just of Braden, but of the idea that no one would believe me. He used his power to control everything around him, including me. But today I'm here to say I'm not afraid anymore." Her words echoed through the courtroom, and for the first time she felt as though she had fully reclaimed her voice. Kate, sitting in the gallery, gave her a reassuring smile, and Veronica felt a wave of gratitude for her friend who had been steadfast in her support. As the case moved forward, Veronica began to rebuild her life. She enrolled in a night course in business administration, something she had always wanted to do, but that Braden had discouraged. In class, she felt a new energy stir within her. Each lesson was a step toward a self-sufficiency she had once thought impossible. The children also started to adjust. Owen made new friends at school, and Sophie began taking dance classes, an activity Veronica had promised herself she would never deny her. Each small victory felt monumental. 2 months after the arrest, Braden's trial began. The courtroom was packed with reporters, and the case garnered national attention. The details of his crimes and abuses painted a damning portrait of a man who had used his position to manipulate, intimidate, and exploit. Veronica's testimony was the centerpiece of the trial. Standing at the witness stand, dressed simply but with a poised and steady demeanor, she recounted her story with brutal honesty. She described years of abuse, threats, and emotional manipulation. "I stayed silent for so long because I thought I didn't have a choice, but I've learned that there's always a choice, and I chose to fight." The impact of her words was palpable. Even Braden's allies in the courtroom couldn't hide their discomfort as they heard what he had done. When the verdict was announced, guilty of corruption and domestic violence, Veronica felt a rush of emotions so intense it nearly left her breathless. It wasn't just about justice for her, but for everyone who had suffered at Braden's hands. After the trial, Veronica walked out of the courthouse surrounded by cameras and journalists, but her focus was on Kate, waiting for her at the steps. "You did it," Kate said, pulling her into a hug. "We did it," Veronica replied, tears in her eyes. In the days that followed, Veronica began to experience the first real glimpses of peace. It wasn't easy, but she knew she was on the right path. One sunny morning, as she sat on the small balcony of her apartment sipping coffee, she watched Owen and Sophie playing in the yard below. For the first time in years, Veronica felt something she hadn't thought possible: hope. The future no longer felt like a shadowy unknown. It was a place full of possibilities, and she was ready to embrace it. Braden's conviction marked a turning point in Veronica's life. With his sentencing for corruption and domestic violence, he faced years in prison, stripped of the power and influence he had wielded to control everything around him. But for Veronica, the end of the trial wasn't the conclusion of her journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could finally breathe, rediscover herself, and start building a life on her own terms. In the months that followed, Veronica focused on rebuilding her identity. The daily routine with her children brought balance and joy to a home that was now modest, but full of life. Mornings were spent getting Owen and Sophie to school, and afternoons were filled with homework, playtime at a nearby park, or simple moments of laughter. Each giggle and smile was a reminder of why she had fought so hard. The challenges didn't vanish overnight. Veronica knew that adjusting to their new life would take time, especially for the children. Sophie, in particular, still asked about her father occasionally, her innocent questions revealing her struggle to understand what had happened. "Is he okay?" Sophie asked one night as Veronica tucked her into bed. Veronica looked at her daughter and chose her words carefully. "He's trying to fix the mistakes he made, sweetheart. And we're okay, aren't we?" Sophie smiled and nodded, her trust in the world Veronica was building for them shining in her eyes. For Veronica, rebuilding wasn't just emotional, it was practical. The business administration course she had started proved more challenging than she had expected, but with every passed exam, her confidence in her ability to carve out a new path grew. Slowly, the idea of starting her own business began to take shape, sparked by the inspiration she found in her classes. Kate remained a constant source of support, her loyalty unwavering. One Saturday afternoon, as the children played in the apartment courtyard, Kate arrived with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. "A toast to the bravest woman I know," Kate said, handing her the gifts. Veronica smiled, placing the flowers in a vase. "I don't think I'd have made it out of that house without you." "Don't say that. The strength was always in you. I just gave you a push." As they talked, Veronica realized for the first time that she could look back without feeling the crushing weight of the past. The memories remained, but they no longer dominated her. Veronica's story resonated far beyond her personal life. Braden's case ignited discussions in the local community about systemic corruption and the hidden epidemic of domestic violence in seemingly perfect homes. Support groups for abuse survivors began to form in Atlanta, and Veronica was invited to speak at several events. At first, she hesitated. The thought of sharing her story in public was daunting, but Kate encouraged her. "You can help other women, Veronica. Show them it's possible to break free." The first time she stepped onto a stage, at an event organized by a local non-profit, her legs trembled. There were about 50 people in the audience, mostly women, though a few men attended to learn how to be better allies. "For years I thought I was alone," she began, her voice low but steady. "I thought no one would understand what I was going through, and that belief almost destroyed me." As she spoke, the words came more easily than she expected. She described the isolation, the fear, and the struggle to reclaim her voice. When she finished, there was a long silence before the audience erupted into applause. Several women approached her afterward, tears in their eyes, thanking her for inspiring them to seek help. Leaving the event, Veronica felt something she hadn't experienced in years: pride. Her pain hadn't been in vain. It was becoming a source of hope for others. Months passed, and Veronica's life continued to settle into a new normal. She and the children spent their first Christmas away from the Brookhaven mansion, and it was the happiest she could remember. Without the constant pressure to appease Braden or maintain a facade, they could simply be a family. The following year, Veronica completed her business administration course and began working at a small accounting firm, learning financial management while planning her own business. The idea of opening a cozy cafe where women could share stories and support one another grew into a tangible goal. One day, while cleaning the apartment, she found the notebook where she had documented Braden's abuses. She sat on the couch, flipping through the pages filled with words that now felt like they belonged to an earlier version of herself. When she reached the end, she closed the notebook with a deep breath and placed it in a box. It was no longer a symbol of pain, but of resilience. Veronica also realized she had rediscovered something vital: her ability to love herself. Years of abuse had erased that part of her, but with each small step forward, she rebuilt it. One morning, While sipping coffee on the balcony, Owen came to sit beside her. "Mom, are you happy?" he asked with the honesty of a child who only wanted to see his mother smile. Veronica looked at her son, smiled, and answered with sincerity, "Yes, Owen, I'm happy." And she meant it. For the first time in years, Veronica felt like she had control over her own life. The journey had been difficult, but she was no longer living in the past. She was moving forward, step by step, building something worth living for. And as she gazed at the clear morning sky, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The future was hers, and it was full of hope. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what you would do in this situation. We're eager to hear from you. And if you missed the last story we shared here on the channel, here's what happened. Lindsay Carter, 36, had been fighting a long and grueling battle with an autoimmune disease that had weakened her for 4 years when her life took an unexpected turn. On a cold night, her husband, Isaiah, came home and announced that he wanted a divorce. He said he felt trapped in the marriage and still had so much life left to live. The harshest blow came next. Isaiah revealed he was involved with a young woman full of health and energy, someone who, to him, symbolized a vibrant future that Lindsay could no longer provide. What Isaiah didn't anticipate was that his selfish choice would have devastating consequences, placing him in a situation he could never have imagined. Click the video appearing on your screen now to uncover how fate exacted its price for Isaiah's selfish actions toward Lindsay. See you there.